It was a dark and desolate night, and I was making my way down the highway, eager to reach the comfort of my home after a long day. The road seemed eerily quiet, with only the distant hum of my engine breaking the silence. As I drove along, my mind began to wander, lost in my own thoughts. That's when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. A figure running towards my car, waving frantically for help. My heart skipped a beat as I quickly glanced at the man approaching. He looked disheveled, his clothes torn, and his eyes wild with fear. Without thinking, I instinctively slowed down, unsure of what was happening. He reached my window and begged for a ride, claiming he had been stranded on the highway. The thought of leaving someone in distress on the dark and deserted road tugged at my heart. But something about the situation felt off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but a wave of unease washed over me. I rolled down my window just a crack, keeping a safe distance between us. "What happened? Do you need help?" I asked, trying to gauge the situation. The man's voice was desperate as he continued to plead for a ride. "Please, you've got to help me. My car broke down and I need to get home. I've been walking for miles." Despite his apparent distress, something about his story didn't sit right with me. My gut told me to be cautious, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the situation than met the eye. I hesitated, unsure of what to do. "I'm sorry, but I can't give you a ride," I finally replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's not safe for me to pick up strangers on the highway." The man's demeanor shifted instantly, and I saw a flicker of anger in his eyes. "Come on, you have to help me. I'm in real trouble here," he urged, his tone now aggressive. My heart raced, and I knew I had to trust my instincts. I quickly rolled up my window and accelerated away from the man, leaving him behind on the highway. I kept my eyes glued to the rearview mirror, watching to see if he would chase after me. But as I drove further down the road, he didn't follow. Instead, he disappeared into the darkness, and I let out a sigh of relief. I continued on my way, my nerves on edge, trying to shake off the encounter. As I approached a gas station further down the highway, I decided to stop and report the incident to the attendants. I explained what had happened, describing the man and his distressing behavior. The attendants looked concerned and immediately notified the police, sharing the description of the man and the events that had unfolded. I stayed at the gas station until the police arrived, eager to provide any additional information that could help. Later that night, I received a call from the police, informing me that the man I encountered was actually a suspect in an armed robbery that had taken place at a gas station earlier that evening. They had managed to apprehend him based on the information I provided, and he was now in custody. The revelation sent chills down my spine, realizing just how close I had come to unknowingly giving a criminal a ride. The thought of what could have happened had I let my guard down made me shudder. It was late, and I found myself driving alone on a deserted highway. The darkness outside seemed to engulf the world, and the only company I had was the soft hum of my engine. Little did I know that this ordinary night would soon turn into a chilling experience that would haunt me for years to come. As fate would have it, my car decided to run out of gas at the worst possible moment. Panic started to set in, and I couldn't help but curse my luck. I pulled over to the side of the desolate road, hoping and praying that a miracle would come my way. With my heart pounding, I weighed my options and decided to leave my car behind and walk to the nearest town to get some fuel. It was a long and eerie walk, with only the faint glow of the moon to guide me. Each step I took felt like a leap into the unknown. Finally, I reached the town and managed to get the fuel I needed. As I headed back to my car, a chill ran down my spine as I noticed a figure standing nearby, lurking in the shadows. It was a man, tall and looming, watching me with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. My instincts screamed at me to be cautious, and I could feel the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. Something about this man seemed off, and every fiber of my being told me to be on guard. As I approached my car, the man stepped out from the darkness and started walking towards me. My heart raced, and I tried my best to stay composed. He seemed friendly enough, but there was an unsettling gleam in his eyes. "Hey, you need some help?" he asked with a seemingly innocent smile. I hesitated for a moment, trying to gather my thoughts. It was late, and I was alone on a deserted highway with a stranger. My gut was screaming at me to be cautious, and I decided to trust my instincts. "No thanks. I've got it under control," I replied, my voice wavering slightly. The man's smile wavered, and I could see a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. He seemed persistent, almost as if he wouldn't take no for an answer. "Are you sure? It's no trouble at all," he insisted, taking a step closer. My heart was pounding, and I could feel my palms getting sweaty. Every instinct in my body was telling me to run, to get back in my car and drive away as fast as I could. "I'm sure," I replied firmly, trying to sound confident. With that, I quickly got into my car, locked the doors, and started the engine. As I pulled away, I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw the man standing there, watching me as I drove off into the darkness. The encounter left me shaken, and I couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if I had given in to his persistence. I felt a sense of relief wash over me, knowing that I had trusted my instincts and avoided a potentially dangerous situation. From that night on, I always made sure to trust my gut and be cautious when alone on deserted highways. It was during our honeymoon, and my wife and I were driving to the picturesque Florida Keys, looking forward to some romantic time together. The sun was slowly setting, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink as we cruised down a deserted highway. As we soaked in the beauty of the landscape, we noticed flashing lights in our rearview mirror. My heart skipped a beat as I saw 2 police cars approaching us. At first, I thought we were in trouble, but then I reassured myself, thinking they might just want to check our documents. But what happened next would shake us to the core. The 2 cars pulled us over on the deserted stretch of road. My wife and I exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what was happening. 2 men dressed in what looked like authentic police uniforms stepped out of their cars and approached us. They flashed their badges, and my unease intensified. "We received reports of a stolen car in the area," one of them said with a stern expression. My wife and I exchanged puzzled looks. We knew our car wasn't stolen, but the situation felt off. Their uniforms looked real, but there was something about their demeanor that made me suspicious. "We need you both to step out of the car for a routine inspection," the other one said, his eyes scanning our vehicle. At this point, my instincts were screaming at me that something wasn't right. I glanced at my wife, and we both knew we had to be cautious. We didn't want to be rude to the police, but we also didn't want to put ourselves in harm's way. "I'm sorry, but we don't feel comfortable stepping out of the car here," I said, trying to sound polite. The officers exchanged glances, and I could see annoyance in their eyes. They seemed agitated by our response, and it sent shivers down my spine. "Look, we just need to check your car to make sure it's not stolen. It won't take long," one of them insisted. But my gut told me not to comply. I knew that real police officers wouldn't be this persistent or ask us to step out of our car on a deserted highway. It was too risky, and I didn't want to take any chances. "I'm sorry, but we'll drive to the nearest police station if there's any issue with our car," I said firmly. With that, my wife and I rolled up our windows, locked the doors, and slowly drove away. I kept an eye on the 2 men in the rearview mirror, and they stood there watching us drive off into the distance. As we left them behind, my heart was pounding in my chest. We had narrowly avoided a potentially dangerous situation, and I couldn't help but feel relieved and scared at the same time. Who were those men? Were they real police officers? Or had we narrowly escaped something sinister? To this day, I can't shake off the feeling of unease that settled over me during that encounter.